The rise of the US dollar as the global currency and its geopolitical implications. The dominance of the US dollar as the global reserve currency is a phenomenon rooted in historical events, strategic decisions, and geopolitical maneuvering. The phrase, "standing against the dollar," means standing directly against the US, encapsulates the immense power the United States wields through its currency, a tool that has been weaponized to maintain global economic and political influence. From the fall of leaders like Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, to the imposition of crippling sanctions on countries like Iran and Russia, the dollar's role in global trade has far-reaching implications. This article explores why the US dollar became the global currency, the compulsions that forced other nations to accept it, and how it shapes geopolitics today. The historical evolution of currency, from barter to gold to paper. Thousands of years ago, before the invention of currency, people relied on the barter system, exchanging goods like tomatoes for rice based on mutual needs. While effective for small-scale trade, bartering posed challenges for large or long-term transactions, as perishable goods could not be stored indefinitely. To address this, societies began using durable commodities like gold, silver, and copper for trade. These metals, valued for their longevity, became a reliable medium of exchange. Around the 7th century BCE, the Kingdom of Lydia revolutionized trade by minting gold and silver coins, standardizing their value and making transactions easier. However, carrying large quantities of heavy metals over long distances remained cumbersome and risky due to theft. To solve this, a system emerged where merchants deposited gold with trusted intermediaries, receiving paper notes as proof of their deposit. These notes could be redeemed for gold at another location, laying the foundation for modern currency and systems like hawala. In China, during the 12th century, Wang Yanlian and the Chinese authorities formalized this system by establishing banks where gold could be deposited in exchange for banknotes. This innovation reduced the risks of transporting precious metals and facilitated trade. When Marco Polo visited China in the 13th century, he was impressed by this paper currency system and brought the concept back to Europe, where it evolved into the pound sterling, a currency backed by gold and widely used in trade. The gold standard and the rise of the pound sterling. By the 19th century, the gold standard dominated global trade. Countries issued paper currencies backed by their gold reserves, ensuring that the amount of currency in circulation corresponded to the gold they held. The United Kingdom, as the world's leading producer of goods and resources, amassed significant gold reserves, making the pound sterling the dominant global currency. By the early 20th century, approximately 60% of international trade was conducted in pound sterling, and some countries even held sterling reserves instead of gold for convenience. However, the outbreak of World War I in 1913 marked a turning point. The UK's economy was strained by war debts amounting to £7.8 billion, equivalent to 25% of its GDP. Its gold reserves dwindled as it imported resources to sustain the war effort. Meanwhile, the United States, initially neutral, profited by selling weapons and supplies to warring nations, accumulating vast gold reserves. The establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913 further strengthened the U.S. economy, setting the stage for the dollar's rise. World War II and the Bretton Woods Agreement. World War II further shifted the global economic landscape. The U.S. emerged as the world's leading exporter, supplying weapons, food, and resources to war-torn nations. By the war's end, the U.S. held approximately 70% of the world's gold reserves, totaling 22,000 tons. The pound sterling, weakened by Germany's counterfeiting efforts and the UK's economic exhaustion, lost its dominance. In 1944, representatives from 44 countries convened at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire to establish a new global financial system. The U.S. proposed that the dollar become the world's reserve currency, backed by its vast gold reserves. Under this system, countries would peg their currencies to the U.S. dollar, which was convertible to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. The U.S. also spearheaded the creation of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank to provide loans in dollars to war-ravaged nations, further entrenching the dollar's dominance. The Marshall Plan, a $13.3 billion aid package, equivalent to $173 billion today, was another masterstroke. The U.S. provided loans in dollars to rebuild Europe, stipulating that repayments must also be in dollars. This ensured that countries relied on the dollar for international trade and debt repayment, creating a cycle of dependency. Why did countries accept the dollar's dominance? Many wonder why other nations, including superpowers like the Soviet Union, accepted the dollar's dominance. The answer lies in a combination of necessity and lack of alternatives. Post-World War II, Europe and Japan were devastated, lacking the resources and gold to rebuild. The US, with its vast gold reserves and economic stability, was the only country capable of leading the global financial system. Countries like Japan, needing essential goods like grain, faced a dilemma. Their currencies, such as the yen, were not widely accepted internationally. In contrast, the US dollar was universally trusted because it was backed by gold. For example, if Japan wanted to buy grain from Sri Lanka, offering yen would be impractical, as Sri Lanka could not use yen in global markets. However, the dollar was accepted everywhere, as it was convertible to gold. This trust in the dollar, coupled with the lack of viable alternatives, forced countries to adopt it for international trade. Moreover, the two major gold-producing countries, South Africa and the Soviet Union, had strained relations with Western nations, making it politically unfeasible for Europe to rely on their gold supplies. The US capitalized on this, using its economic leverage and the Marshall Plan to integrate the dollar into global trade. The dollar as a geopolitical weapon. The US dollar's dominance extends beyond economics into geopolitics. The US has used its control over the global financial system to impose sanctions on countries like Iran, Russia, and others, crippling their economies overnight. This is because much of global trade, especially in critical commodities like oil, is conducted in dollars. When the US imposes sanctions, it can exclude countries from the dollar-based financial system, making it nearly impossible for them to engage in international trade. For instance, Saddam Hussein's refusal to use the dollar for Iraq's oil trade and Muammar Gaddafi's push for a gold-backed African currency threatened the dollar's hegemony. Both leaders faced severe consequences, including overthrow and death, highlighting the US's willingness to protect its currency's dominance. Similarly, sanctions on Iran and Russia have caused significant economic hardship, as these countries struggle to access dollar-based financial networks like SWIFT. Why do sanctions from countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, or South Africa lack impact? These nations do not control a globally dominant currency or financial system. The US dollar's unique position as the world's reserve currency gives the US unparalleled leverage, allowing it to influence global trade and politics in ways other nations cannot. The petrodollar system, cementing dollar dominance. The US further solidified the dollar's role through the petrodollar system. In the 1970s, the US struck a deal with Saudi Arabia, a major oil producer. American companies provided technology and expertise to extract and market Saudi oil, and in return, Saudi Arabia agreed to price its oil exports exclusively in dollars and invest surplus revenues in US Treasury bonds. Other OPEC countries followed suit, ensuring that global oil trade, the lifeblood of the world economy, was conducted in dollars. This arrangement forced countries to hold dollar reserves to purchase oil, further entrenching the dollar's dominance. Why understanding the dollar matters? The US dollar's role as the global reserve currency is central to understanding geopolitics. By analyzing trade patterns between countries, one can gauge their political and economic relations. For example, a country's reliance on dollar-based trade often indicates alignment with US interests, while efforts to de-dollarize, as seen in Russia and China's push for alternative currencies, signal geopolitical tensions. The dollar's dominance is not just a financial phenomenon, it is a tool of power. It allows the US to influence global markets, impose sanctions, and maintain its status as a superpower. However, this system is not without challenges. Rising US debt, geopolitical rivalries, and efforts by countries like China and Russia to create alternative financial systems threaten the dollar's hegemony. Yet for now, the dollar remains the linchpin of the global economy, shaping trade, politics, and power dynamics worldwide. In conclusion, the US dollar's rise to global dominance was a result of historical circumstances, strategic foresight, and economic necessity. From the ashes of World War II to the establishment of the petrodollar system, the US leveraged its economic might to make the dollar indispensable. Understanding this dynamic is key to deciphering global geopolitics, as the dollar continues to shape the world's economic and political landscape.